All right, everybody. Welcome to another office hour that I didn't necessarily think we'd be having so soon, but here we are. Hopefully, those of you who are joining are familiar with the fact that I've been having some technical difficulties, I think because this is a relatively old computer. I've been doing some tech troubleshooting. As I mentioned, I've been working on the Ethernet connection under the house. I've had some advice from helpful folks who just helped me configure OBS so that hopefully things move a little more smoothly. Don't want to jinx anything, but so far it seems to be doing better, even though I'm actually pushing it a bit by including this live animation of Hurricane Hilary of the screen. That is live, and it should be updating live as I talk. And I did this, I've done this only once or twice before, because this is a fairly extraordinary image, given that this is a storm that is going to affect California quite significantly by later on Sunday. It's Friday afternoon, and this storm is still a Category 4 hurricane. It actually just put on yet another burst of strengthening. This will be the last burst of strengthening that Hilary puts on before it begins a rather rapid weakening process, likelihood, but certainly by tomorrow morning. This is to weaken below hurricane strength before it reaches California, but will nonetheless bring potentially unprecedented level of impacts, making landfall as an actual tropical storm somewhere between the San Diego, U.S. And Los Angeles in all likelihood. The track is still subject to some uncertainty, but for the first time in recorded history, the National Hurricane Center, in conjunction with local National Weather Service offices, have issued tropical storm watches for coastal California. I just wanted to quickly summarize that, talk a few action items and administrative points, and then dive into it. I'm only going to be talking about Hilary today. I will likely be doing several live streams this weekend, including probably one every day, honestly. They may be a bit shorter because they'll be more frequent, but I will likely do one Saturday, Sunday, certainly on Monday, and then perhaps again on Tuesday to discuss a bit of the aftermath. Peak impacts will be Sunday into Monday in most parts of Southern California, so that's the key window to be looking out for. As I mentioned, it looks like some of the tech tips looks like they may have helped so far. This is running pretty nicely. Some folks are saying there is some skipping in the video. Well, unfortunately, this is the best I think I'm going to have through the weekend. I do, I think, eventually need to just get a new computer. I just don't think the processor is capable of handling having OBS open and one browser open, by the way, just to view the comments on YouTube. Those don't come in through OBS. I'm not going to change anything at this point. I did see that little skip by myself. Okay, so it is skipping in and out. So the session, I'm going to leave things as they are unless they get significantly worse, in which case I'm going... It's frustrating. I really just, I think unfortunately it's the hardware, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. What I'm going to do, unfortunately, the first thing I'm going to try is removing the animation. You can find it online. Suffice it to say, it's an impressive storm. That's still impressive. It's going to go away momentarily. Maybe that will help some. And then, yes, okay, there it goes. Hopefully that will help. Some folks suggested if you want to help out with that aspect of things, I did set up a Buy Me Coffee account, so don't feel obligated. But if you are so inclined, that does now exist since folks were asking for it. You can find me under Weather West, no underscore or space. So be that as it may, I don't think I'm going to be able to get new hardware between now and when this potentially historic weather event occurs, so we're just going to have to make the best of it that I can using the means I have available right now. So, what is going on? Well, Hilary, as I mentioned, hurricane off the west coast of Mexico, getting closer to southern Baja, California, and this is a storm that is going to take a pretty sharp northward turn imminently and ride up the western coast of Baja, California, all the way up the western coast. This is unfortunately going to rake the Baja Peninsula pretty severely. The west coast of Baja, including the more northern parts of the peninsula, including Ensenada and Tijuana, are going to be pretty hard hit by this storm. The eastern side of the peninsula, too, since that's where the upslope from these spiral bands around the hurricane are going to drop the most water, are going to be susceptible to potentially extreme flash flood risks. So I'm going to focus mostly on the risks in California today, but there are also major risks from flood and wind farther to the south in northwestern Mexico, and particularly on Baja, where hurricane landfalls are quite rare on the west, on the northwestern part of the peninsula, and this could actually affect that part of the peninsula as a full-fledged hurricane. Because, of course, that's a little bit farther south. Hilary is going to have even less time to weaken before it reaches northern Baja than before it reaches southern California on its northward trek. So what are we expecting? Again, Hilary is currently a Category 4 on the 5-category Saffir-Simpson scale, so that's a 4 out of 5. That is very impressive. It appears that it may be even be putting on one last burst of strengthening and trying to make a run at Category 5 status, which would be very impressive, although not unprecedented. We do get very intense hurricanes in this region occasionally. The reason why this particular hurricane is so strong is all the atmospheric parameters are favorable, including much warmer than usual ocean temperatures in that region off the southern tip of Baja, where the storm currently is. Additionally, there's almost no wind shear currently, and the atmosphere is exceptionally moist. There's a huge amount of water vapor. There's no dry air intrusion to speak of right now. All of those factors will become much more hostile for this storm as it moves to the north. So that is going to be a major reason why we're not really concerned about an actual hurricane making landfall at hurricane strength in California. So this is a storm that is going to be rapidly weakening. The difference from the typical situation, though, is it's so strong right now, and it is going to move so quickly and make a beeline for Southern California, it simply isn't going to have time to fall apart nearly as much as these systems usually do before they reach California. So for this reason, it is now likely that for the first time since 1939, the year of the Long Beach tropical cyclone, a tropical cyclone at tropical storm strength or greater will likely make landfall in or near Southern California late Sunday or early Monday morning, potentially in the overnight hours. And as I mentioned, this is the first time that there's ever been a tropical wind advisory or warning for anywhere on the west coast of the continental United States. So currently this is in effect for San Diego and Orange counties, as well as some other portions of Southern California. That has never happened before in the era during which the Hurricane Center and the Weather Service have been issuing such warnings, which goes back to the 1950s. Again, this has never happened. That warning has never been issued in California before. That does not mean that California has never experienced tropical storms before. Of course, there is the 1939 event, which caused quite a bit of damage and a triple-digit number of deaths, so that was not a trivial event, especially given that the population of Southern California back in 1939 was many-fold less than it is today. And California has also experienced a number of either near misses or direct hits from storms that had weakened below tropical storm strength by the time they actually got to the state. That includes, I believe it was Kathleen in 1976, and many other events that produce lesser impacts. But many of these events have actually been high-impact storm events in Southern California from a flash flood perspective. Even remnant storms, if they don't pack very strong winds, can produce extremely heavy rainfall in the preferred upslope regions. The difference is, when a tropical storm hits an area with relatively low topography, you're going to get about as much rain as the spiral bands of showers and thunderstorms that are associated with tropical storms can produce. In the case of California, though, One big difference is that we have a lot of tall mountains in Southern California, and this tropical storm is going to heavily interact with those in ways that can produce locally very extreme precipitation amounts, much larger than you'd expect if the topography was much flatter. So the main risk with this event is going to be a potentially high or even very high risk of flooding in some areas, and in particular on the eastern slopes of the mountains in San Diego and Riverside counties, as well as the high and low desert regions stretching all the way from the Imperial Valley down by Calexico and Brawley all the way up through Ridgecrest and Death Valley. So the entire axis of southeastern California deserts extending from Imperial County all the way up into parts of Inyo County are at risk of potentially very serious flash flooding. We're not just talking about normally dry washes running. We're talking about the type of flooding that will be life-threatening, that could severely disrupt or even destroy critical infrastructure, including roads and highways, leading to extended power outages or extended impossibility of travel in some areas. So this, again, is what I'm referring to really from the Coachella Valley eastward, including the eastern slopes of the Southern California mountains. The flood risk will be highest there. The Weather Prediction Center by NOAA, which is responsible for issuing broad regional extreme precipitation and flood outlooks, has highlighted the eastern slopes of San Diego and Riverside counties as being at the highest possible risk for flash flooding from late Sunday and through Monday. That should set off some alarm bells because historical track record for the WPC, formerly the HPC, issuing high-risk flood statements several days in advance. Unfortunately, those almost always turn out to be very high-impact events and unfortunately highly destructive and deadly events. So the fact that already parts of Southern California are highlighted as being in the very highest possible risk tier for flash flooding from the Weather Prediction Center is the transverse ranges in particular. So the flood risk is probably highest again on the eastern slopes of the mountains in San Diego and Riverside counties, but all of the transverse ranges of Southern California are potentially at risk of flash flooding and debris flows. And even the major population centers, Los Angeles Metro, San Diego Metro, are at risk of at least some flooding. It likely won't be as severe or extreme as the flooding that's possible in some deserts, but of course it's still notable because it is August. And so that's something that you typically would not expect to see. I'm just going to try and change one more setting here because I'm getting a lot of dropouts. I know it's intelligible. The recording afterward is actually better because it cuts out the gaps. They just become slightly awkward transitions. So hopefully it's still usable after the fact. Let me just tweak that. Great. I think this is probably the greatest viewership that I've had on any live stream, which makes sense. This is a potentially historic weather event especially for Southern California. All right, so I've talked now. I'll talk more about the rain and flood risk as we move forward, but I want to turn briefly to the wind and other risks. As mentioned, this is the first time that a tropical storm watch for tropical storm strength winds has ever been issued for Southern California. Southern California has certainly experienced tropical storm strength winds during non-tropical storms over the years, so these will not necessarily be record-breaking winds, but nonetheless, they will be coming from a fairly unusual direction, which will depend on the exact path the storm takes. If it takes a more westerly track and makes landfall between San Diego and Los Angeles, the winds will be coming mainly out of the south and southeast, potentially the east for a time initially. If the storm takes a more easterly track, the winds will be mainly easterly and even northeasterly downslope winds, and they would probably be weaker in that case. Wind gusts anywhere from 40 to 60 plus miles an hour will be possible at lower elevations, so that's not super destructive, but that's definitely enough to cause power outages and knock down some trees potentially. So the wind, it will feel like a significant winter storm in terms of wind at lower elevations. At higher elevations, winds could actually be stronger than that, and there could be winds that approach hurricane force at high elevations. And in particular, there could be gusts well above 70 to 80 miles an hour at high elevations, because as the storm dissipates, it takes longer for winds aloft to dissipate, and of course some topography that reaches above 5,000 and 6,000 feet. And so at that elevation, it is possible that much stronger than tropical storm force winds could exist. This happened last year during the Tropical Storm K, which did come fairly close to San Diego, with wind gusts over 100 miles an hour in the highest elevations of the San Diego County mountains. We could see similar effects from this storm over a broader region of the Southern California mountains. So there could be some significant wind impacts at higher elevations. In terms of marine interest, there will be an unusually active swell coming from an unusual direction from the southeast. So this will expose the eastern side of the Channel Islands to potential significant wave action. The harbors there could be at risk. There will even be potentially, depending again on the exact track the storm takes, a little bit of storm surge up to a couple of feet. This won't be a hugely significant part of the storm in all likelihood, but imagine that the sea level rises for a temporary period by a couple of feet, and then you have some waves on top of that. That could certainly lead to some coastal flooding of the beach parking lots and some of the streets and facilities that are within a few feet of sea level. Again, that's not the main concern from this event, but it is something that could happen depending on the track. So we covered initially the rain, which I'll come back to, the winds, which will be significant but probably not the main story, the marine environment, which hopefully folks will water and away from the water from Sunday through Monday at least. That would be wise, and be prepared for swells and wave activity from unusual directions. Something else that could happen, and has now been highlighted by the Storm Prediction Center, which is a different NOAA entity responsible for predicting severe convective weather, in other words, thunderstorms. There certainly will be probably some lightning embedded in the spiral convective bands swirling around former Hurricane Hilary, what will at that point be former Hurricane Hilary and probable Tropical Storm Hilary. And in those spiral bands, it is possible there could be some thunderstorms that produce severe wind gusts above 55 or 60 miles an hour locally, and also even the possibility of some isolated tornadic spin-ups. This will still probably be a warm core tropical cyclone right off the coast of LA or San Diego, and so there could be potentially a couple of tornadic spin-ups. These would be most likely over the water and could easily become waterspouts, another reason to stay off the water. But this is not likely to be a major part of the storm impacts, but it's something that could occur, and folks will be watching closely. The Weather Service would issue short-fused individual tornado warnings if those were either observed or detected on radar. So stay tuned for that. These would likely be tornadoes on the weaker side, but still, that could still produce some damage and cause local hazards. So this is a pretty rare situation, a potential for a landfalling tropical storm in Southern California producing heavy to locally extreme rainfall, tropical storm strength winds at lower elevations and with higher gusts in the mountains, and the possibility even a or two in the storm's spiral bands. That's a pretty wild forecast for Southern California. All right, so that covers the big picture. I want to go back to the rain and flash flood risk, and then I want to discuss a little bit of atmospheric science and some history, because some folks have really mischaracterized what's going on. One thing I want to be clear about is that this is not an ordinary summer tropical remnant event for the deserts of southeastern California. This is an event that could produce once-in-a-century level precipitation in some regions, where the lower deserts that receive very low precipitation on an average annual basis, places that receive less than 5 inches of rain in a typical year, could see upward of 5 or 10 inches in a 2 to 3 day period. So we're talking the potential for multiple years worth of precipitation in just 2 days in some parts of the deserts of southeastern California, southern Nevada, and far western Arizona. These are very dry places, and those would be high rainfall amounts even for places that weren't so dry. So the potential is now very high for widespread flash flooding, and frankly, severe flash flooding that could verge on historic flash flooding in ways, even some interstates that go through the desert to become impassable, washed out, or potentially even see some bridges destroyed by the level of flooding that could occur. These will be highly energetic flows. There could easily be major debris flows in different regions, in areas of enhanced terrain or in recent wildfire burn areas. There could be even some activation of the alluvial fans. These are a geologic feature that exists in the Antelope Valley and in other parts of the slopes, especially the eastern slopes of the mountains in Southern California. We've built a lot of suburbs on them, so people do live on them. There is both industry and residential housing atop these geologic features that are usually static. But how did they get there? Well, they form during events like this. So there is some real potential for some things to go pretty sideways late Sunday into Monday. Again, primarily on the eastern slopes of the mountains in Southern California and both the low and high deserts all the way from the Imperial Valley northward into Inyo County. Death Valley in particular has been highlighted as a place that is likely to experience potentially terrain-altering flash flooding during this event, meaning that even though there's been some pretty severe flash flooding in Death Valley, the national park, in recent years, this will likely be considerably worse than the extreme flooding we've seen in Death Valley in recent years. I would be pretty surprised if any national park, at least for weeks after this event, if not longer, because a lot of the roads probably won't be there anymore. Hopefully the other park infrastructure fares better, but this is the kind of event that could really wipe out some of the national park infrastructure, certainly in Death Valley, to a slightly lesser degree, maybe in Joshua Tree. It's a little bit less susceptible to the flooding in most areas. But for perspective, Death Valley could see rainfall over a two-day period that is 50% or more greater than the record two-day precipitation in that part of the world. So not just 50% greater than average or breaking the record by a small amount, but a full 50 to perhaps even 100% above the previous record for all-time two-day precipitation accumulation is quite plausible in a place like Death Valley, as well as in some other places that receive very little precipitation in the Imperial Valley further to the south. So again, this has the potential to bring the single and most intense precipitation event ever observed to some parts of the deserts in southeastern California. So don't take this lightly. If you're in a region that's ever flooded in the deserts, this is an event where you probably will flood again. If you're in a region that has never flooded, but you've always wondered if you might be at risk, well, this is one to take the event seriously. Be prepared, if you live in the deserts, to have roads that are impassable for an extended period of time and to be cut off for an extended period of time, potentially. So this is no joke. That bad in most of the more highly populated coastal corridor from the San Diego Metro up through Orange County and into Los Angeles County. But there could be significant flooding in some places locally nonetheless. So this will depend more on the track. But I really wanted to highlight the southeastern interior and the desert regions, as well as those eastern mountain slopes, as places where I'm genuinely concerned for the potential for historic flash flooding. For perspective, this will likely be the moistest atmosphere on record for Southern California. Right now, it looks like there will ultimately be a column-integrated amount of moisture. Essentially, if you to sum up all the water vapor in the air from the surface to the top of the atmosphere, that is greater than at any previously observed point in any month in Southern California. The integrated vapor transport, which essentially is what happens when you multiply that column integrated water vapor by the vertical winds, will also be higher in some places than we have ever observed at any time of year. This is why we're so concerned about the potential for historic rainfall in the eastern desert region. And again, these are places where, 5 or 10 inches, that might be, a moderately extreme winter storm on the coastal side of the transverse ranges in Southern California, right? So that has happened, that probably happened a couple times just this past winter. Those places get a lot of rainfall during strong upload during winter storms. But again, this is the opposite side of the mountains. The infrastructure, the geology is not aligned with seeing 5 to 10 inches of rainfall in over a 2-day period, to the extent that it would be elsewhere in California. So this is a very big deal in those places. The exact amounts, which places get hardest hit, is really just going to depend on the exact track, but it appears that there's a very low likelihood at this point that someone in the aforementioned regions isn't going to get hit quite hard. All right. Let's see here. What do I want to cover next? Yes, some history. As I mentioned, this is the first time that there's ever been a formal tropical storm or hurricane watch or warning for any part of the continental U.S. West Coast. That is just a statement of historical fact. It does not mean that California has never experienced tropical cyclone landfall before. The most recent example was in 1939 when a tropical storm landfall near Long Beach and caused quite a bit of damage. But that already should tell you that this is a rare event because, of course, 1939 was a pretty long time ago, predating the modern National Weather Service completely. And the time before that, I think that most folks might point to, is the slightly fuzzy 8 San Diego hurricane, which is thought to have been a storm that was probably at or near hurricane strength, so stronger even than a tropical storm, that either made landfall or came close to doing so near San Diego in 1858. And as far as we are aware, those are the only 2 recorded historical instances of any kind of intact tropical cyclone making landfall along the California coast until now. So clearly this is something that is physically possible. This is something that has happened before. I'm sure there are any number of instances in the geologic history of California if you go back hundreds or thousands of years, but in contemporary climate it is certainly a rare occurrence. And it has not occurred in the era when tens of millions of people certainly lived in Southern California. So in terms of impacts, we've never really seen an event like this in the modern era. Most reliable precipitation forecasts, and I always closely read the forecast discussions by local National Weather Service offices during events like this. That's a great way to get a look into the minds of the very busy and overworked National Weather Service forecasters. The language coming out of the Phoenix Weather Service office, which is actually the office responsible for most of the southeastern California deserts. It's not the San Diego or Los Angeles offices, but it's actually the Phoenix office, is quite frankly pretty dire. And I can't say that I disagree. There's just some disbelief over some of the metrics. There's a comment in the most recent discussion that the amount of water vapor transport in the atmosphere is something like 14 standard deviations from the norm. I don't take that at face value. Clearly, at that point, we're not using the right statistical distribution. It's not a normal distribution, so it's not really fully appropriate statistically to talk about standard deviations. That this is a historically unprecedented event in that respect, and I don't think it's actually 14 standard deviations, but the point is we're breaking the statistical model. So it's, sorry, I just cut out there again. So it's definitely up there with the most extreme water vapor transport events that we've ever seen, and very well might exceed anything that we've ever seen in this region, which is why we're so concerned about the potential flood risk, because when there's that much water vapor being pushed by winds that are that strong against mountainous topography with some amount of atmospheric instability, so thunderstorm potential, you could potentially see as much as 1 to 3 inches of rain in an hour in some of these desert and eastern slope mountain locations. And that could continue for multiple hours. So that is the big concern here. And this is why there is increasingly strong language being used by official forecast sources regarding the flood risk side of things. So take this seriously if you're in that region. Just to go back to the history, sorry for the interruption there. The reality is there are 3 big things that keep hurricanes from hitting California. So there's not just one, not just 2, but there's 3 major barriers. One is perhaps the most obvious one. The ocean temperatures are just too cold. Warm ocean waters are hurricane fuel. and there just isn't any hurricane fuel in the waters immediately off of California. It's just too cold. You need water temperatures usually significantly above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. This is why hurricanes tend to be tropical events. The California cold current keeps things a lot colder at California's latitude on the west coast than the equivalent latitude on the east coast. The Gulf Stream does the opposite. It makes the ocean much warmer than it would otherwise be at that latitude. That's why you can see hurricanes as far north as Boston and Maine, and even sometimes Nova Scotia on the Atlantic side, but you don't really see them north of Baja California on the Pacific side, so quite a big latitudinal difference there. So that's one reason. Cold ocean kills off hurricanes because Number two is in the tropics there are prevailing easterly winds. Easterly meaning blowing from east to west. In the Atlantic basin, when you have winds that blow from east to west, those east to west winds tend to blow storms toward land. So they form out over the Atlantic Ocean and they move westward toward the Gulf of Mexico, which is surrounded by land, or they move westward toward the eastern seaboard. So that's why you can get hurricane landfalls there more frequently. Those easterly winds also exist in the tropics over the Pacific, except that here, because the coastline is to the east, if you get a storm that forms off the west coast of Mexico and it moves east to west based on these prevailing winds, it gets blown away from land. So it moves away from the west coast, usually, of North America, and away from California out over the open ocean. This is why Hawaii does occasionally see hurricanes, because sometimes these storms from the eastern Pacific can sustain their strength all the way to the central Pacific because the ocean temperatures are warmer there. So reason number one, no hurricane fuel, the ocean's too cold. Reason number two, tropical easterly winds blow storms away from shore and don't allow them to get close to California. And number three is that the atmospheric environment too is also hostile in general for tropical cyclones near California. It's too stable, there's too much downward motion in the atmosphere. That's known as subsidence, acts like a lid on the atmosphere, prevents the formation of clouds, precipitation, and upward motion that is required for any sort of storm or precipitation, but in particular really puts a lid on tropical cyclones. And that's because we live at the margin of the subtropics. This is just why we have our marine layer. That's also the product of subsidence, downward motion in the atmosphere. It squishes all of that cool, moist marine air in a narrow layer near the surface. You can see the top of it even. If you go to the high hills in the Bay Area or the San Diego, Los Angeles region, the marine layer is thin. So this California tends not to see hurricanes, or it individually might be enough to prevent that from happening. And in concert, the three things put together really put the kibosh on tropical activity. So why is this happening now then? Why are we going to see potentially a tropical storm make landfall near San Diego? Well, one of those three things in particular is conspicuously absent, and that is the east to west steering winds are not currently in place. There is a very unusual weather pattern across North America right now with a very strong ridge that is building across the center of the country, potentially a record-breaking ridge. This may bring extreme heat to the center of the country. At the same time, there is an unusually persistent trough of low pressure off the west coast associated with a cutoff low. And in between those two features is a region of south to north steering winds in the atmosphere. This hurricane formed at exactly the right time to get caught up in that south to north flow, which is very unusual. So that one barrier to California tropical cyclones is not present. So one of the walls is down, the deflector shield, if you will. Number two, the ocean temperatures off the coast of Baja California are much warmer than usual right now, as much as 2 to 4 centigrade or 3 to 6 Fahrenheit. That's a pretty significant increment of additional hurricane fuel. That is likely one of the reasons why Hilary has already achieved Category 4 and may even achieve Category 5 hurricane status before it peaks and then starts to weaken before moving toward California. So these unusually warm ocean temperatures are perhaps associated in large part with El Nino, but also with the long-term warming of the oceans. So now to be clear though, the ocean temperatures off the coast of Southern California are not particularly warmer than average right now. So it's not that the temperature, say, off of the Scripps Pier is supporting the storm so much as the very warm temperatures off the southern tip of Baja are allowing the storm to attain so much strength far away from California that once this unusual steering wind pattern allows the storm to get picked up to move from south to north and make a beeline on Southern California, it just won't have as much time to weaken. So if this were only a Category 1 or 2 storm, it likely would have weakened well below even tropical storm strength by the time it got to California. But because this is currently a powerful hurricane, and you saw that initially in the animation that I couldn't keep up on the screen due to bandwidth issues, this storm is going to weaken rapidly, but even rapid weakening means that it's still going to come ashore as a significant storm because it has a long way to weaken, and it's going to be arriving rather quickly. So that's why California doesn't see more hurricanes or tropical storms. It's why we are potentially going to see a tropical storm now. It's also why there is a 0 chance that this storm arrives in California as a major hurricane. I know some folks have been very concerned to see how alarming the storm looks on the satellite and to hear descriptions of winds of 140 miles an hour. But the reality is there is no physical possibility that a storm of that strength would actually make it to California under anything even close to the conditions we currently have. The oceans aren't suddenly going to warm by 15 degrees overnight. I would bet my career on that one. So I don't think we have to worry about a major hurricane landfall in California. All of that said, this is still a remarkable, rare, historic event for California and could produce very severe, even disastrous flood-related impacts for certain parts of the southeastern desert California interior. And you may notice I've now said that 5 or 6 times. That's because I don't expect this to be an extremely damaging storm in the major urban corridor along the coast in Southern California. Although it will be disruptive, there will be some flooding, there will be some wind damage, and it will be a very notable event historically. But in other parts of Southern California, in the deserts, on the eastern slopes of the mountains, this will be a very dangerous storm and potentially rivaling or exceeding the level of flooding seen, for example, in 1976 with the remnants of Kathleen or during any number of other tropical remnant events. It probably won't exceed all historical events everywhere. It will be somewhat patchwork, but I highly suspect that there will be some regions, and it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where within the southeastern desert region now, except to say I think Death Valley is actually going to be very hard hit, that will experience levels of flooding that we just haven't seen before. And recurrence intervals for some of the projected median precipitation from this event exceed the 100-year recurrence interval in some places. Locally in Death Valley, it exceeds the projected 500-year recurrence interval, although at that point I don't really trust those statistical models either. So suffice it to say, in some places it is highly likely we'll see an amount of precipitation in a 2-day period that we have not seen in living memory and probably not in the last century. So yes, this is a big deal. And these are, again, very flashy desert watersheds that are not accustomed to huge... The other thing, too, is, by the way, the deserts of southeastern California actually are susceptible to flash flooding generally during monsoon season in the summer due to isolated but very intense thunderstorms. The difference there, though, is you might see one wash or one stream or even one river that's heavily affected by a single thunderstorm cell or a cluster of thunderstorm cells, but it's relatively localized. It might extend over just a couple of square miles, maybe 10 or 20 square miles. This event is going to extend over almost all of southeastern California. Everyone is going to see at least a few inches of rainfall in places where heavy rainfall is rare, and some places are going to see 5 to 10 plus inches of rainfall embedded within that. So these watersheds are going to be getting a huge volume of water from everywhere, and then on top of that, where the worst flooding ends up occurring is going to be where we do get those 5 to 10 inch pockets from extreme thunderstorm downpours in these tropical cyclone outer bands. Meteorologically, something interesting, and that's going to contribute to additional flood risk that's occurring, I haven't mentioned it yet, is, as far as I'm aware, for the first time I've ever observed, it looks like there's going to be what's called a Predecessor rain event, or a PRE, in advance of this storm in the southeastern California deserts. This occurs when an extremely moist air mass is advected to the north and east of an oncoming tropical cyclone and in a favorable region for dynamic lift. So essentially, in relative to the offshore low pressure system, there is a jet streak located over southeastern California and southern Nevada. once the extremely moist air mass is advected into that area, the favorable atmospheric dynamics could lead to heavy precipitation long before this tropical storm gets anywhere near Southern California. So this won't affect coastal areas on Saturday and early Sunday, but this actually may affect the eastern slopes of the mountains in Southern California and the deserts of southeastern California. So the heavy rain could actually begin as soon as tomorrow in those places. There might be a brief lull then before the tropical storm arrives, and then even heavier rain will arrive associated with the tropical storm itself and its spiral convective bands. So if you get some heavy precipitation or flooding tomorrow in the deserts of southeastern California, don't think that's the end of the event. In fact, the much bigger precipitation event is likely to come afterward and will be doubly impactful because you will have seen significant rainfall that has saturated soils and that already doesn't have a lot of water infiltration capacity. So washes may already be running high by the time the tropical storm actually gets there. That is one of the other reasons why we're so concerned about the very high risk of severe flooding in southeastern California during that period. All right, so I've sort of gone through for 45 minutes monologue. I think I've covered the main points. I just want to reiterate a few things. One, yes, I am well aware that California has seen tropical cyclone landfalls before, but they are very rare, and it is a factually correct statement that a tropical storm watch or hurricane watch has never previously been issued for any part of coastal California or anywhere on the coast of the western United States. There is currently one in effect for much of Southern California, a tropical storm watch. So this is the first time that has happened, and that is historically notable. The last time there was a landfalling tropical storm on coastal California was 1939, when one made landfall near Long Beach, and the time before that was perhaps 1858 with the 1858 San Diego hurricane, thought to have been a hurricane. So obviously, we're still in very rare territory. And of course, we've never had an event like this in the period when tens of millions of people have lived in Southern California, so the impacts would likely be greater than any of these events in recent decades. All right, and I also wanted to reiterate that I am going to, in between media interviews, try and crank out a blog post this evening. Please bear with me, it might be kind of late. There's just a lot going on. I'm going to be online pretty much all weekend. I will probably be doing YouTube live sessions every day between now and Tuesday. They may be slightly shorter, they may run long, it really just depends. The times will be announced relatively short notice, hopefully a few hours in advance. And as always, they'll be recorded. Alright, now I'm going to start looking at questions, since I know people have a lot. Please bear with me with some silence. Take a sip of water, and I'm gonna start going through the questions. It might take me a minute to get up to speed. Oh, and just, on the technical side, this really is a YouTube live streaming via OBS issue. It looks like some of the technical fixes, they may have helped a little bit, but I'm still having the core problem, so at least it's intelligible and usable stream right now. I don't want to mess things up too much this weekend given what's going on, but in the long run, I just think I need to upgrade the machine, so I'll work on the budget for that as soon as I can. Okay. Yes, I know it was a little bit perhaps overly ambitious to be running that animation of the satellite from Hilary. You can find similar imagery on the National Hurricane Center website, or at risk of overloading his amazing website is Levi Cohen's tropicaltidbits.com. It's a great website. Please be kind to his server, though. He runs it himself. Let's see. Alright, more technical comments. I can get through that. A technical question for folks who know, just you can answer at the end. Do you think it would be helpful if the main issue is my 2018 MacBook processor? Would it be helpful to run these through like StreamYard or something? I tried running it through one of those intermediary streaming services on the last stream, and it was even worse somehow. So let me know if something, since I think server-side rendering and video processing might actually solve a lot of the problems, so just let me know. Alrighty here. Thank you for folks who are apparently buying coffees in the background. I can't see that right now because I can only have one tab open apparently at a time right now, but thank you, and I'll take a look at that later. Hopefully I can thank some folks in person. Let's see here. Oh, good point. A couple of folks are asking about fire weather potential. In general, I don't think that's going to be one of the greatest impacts from the storm, with a couple of caveats. One is that there may be a brief window of severe fire weather conditions when the downslope offshore winds arrive locally before the humidity won't be super low at any point, but the winds could be high, and if there is an ignition prior to rain falling, there could be some problems. They would be short-lived though, because essentially everywhere in Southern California is expected to see heavy, or at least at a minimum, soaking and probably heavy rainfall. So any ignitions would be short-lived. As we know, even wind-driven fires that last only a few hours can cause big problems. But in general, I don't think this is going to be a huge problem for Southern California. Let's see. There could be some bigger issues, though, farther away, ironically. So the farther we go from the tropical storm, the far northwestern California, where there are currently major large fires due to a recent dry lightning outbreak, is unlikely to see significant precipitation and might not see any rain at all from this event zone. We still don't know exactly whether the Bay Area, the Central Valley, the Sierra, how much rain may fall. Essentially, in general, it's more likely the farther south and east you go. So east of Sacramento, south of the Bay Area, most people will see at least a little bit of rain. West and north of that, it's less clear. It could happen. We'll just have to see the exact path the center of circulation takes. There's actually some elevated fire weather concerns, though, farther north, amazingly, up over the Pacific Northwest. Washington and Oregon are also experiencing a fire outbreak due to lightning and record-breaking heat. Unfortunately, this system may interact with an existing low pressure up there to produce moderate to strong offshore winds, so east to west winds in the Cascades, and these fires in a very inopportune time. So this actually may result in fire weather concerns up in the Cascades more than in California. Up in northwestern California, where fires are burning in Del Norte and other counties up Trinity, Tehama, I think there may even be one right now up in Shasta County as well, or at least one. There were dozens of lightning ignitions, so I'm not currently up to date on which of them have become active versus not. I think this will be mostly a neutral event. There might be some easterly breezes. I don't think there's either going to be significant rainfall or violent windstorm as a result of this, so I'm not sure that it's going to help or hurt really that much in California. It might hurt more than help, though, up in the Pacific Northwest. That's my current thinking. I'll update that over the weekend. I mentioned about the uncertainty along the Central Coast. It's less likely that the Central Coast, well, I guess it depends on whose definition of the Central Coast. The Ventura and Santa Barbara coastal regions and up to the transverse ranges could see heavy rainfall and some strong winds depending on the track. The rest of the Central Coast will probably be much less affected, and in general that region should be less affected than elsewhere. But again, if you get a training convective band over the transverse ranges in Santa Barbara County or something, we know it only downpours sometimes to have major debris flows. So that is potentially a risk. That's why the flood watch is extended all the way up into there, because we aren't 100% sure about the track, and it only takes one big downpour to cause some problems. Lightning potential, there is some. Generally speaking, the lightning would be accompanied by heavy rain, so that is less of a concern for ignitions. The main concern would be any ignitions that occur prior to widespread precipitation beginning. when there are strong winds. It'll be a narrow window, not a zero window. Question about enabling auto captions. They actually should be enabled. I've actually used them to transcribe my own videos before, so let me know if for some reason that got turned off somehow, but they should be on, and if they're not, I'll make sure they are. What are the chances of an eastward turn? There is still some uncertainty regarding the exact path, but at this point there is remarkable agreement among models that this storm is going to pass through some part of Southern California. Now, whether it passes through the Southern California Bight west of LA and San Diego, or whether it passes directly over the interior part of Southern California and goes directly up through the Imperial Valley, that is sort of the range of uncertainty. But this is not going to be something that makes landfall in Arizona, and it's probably not. It's not going to be something that misses California either. This is unusually high confidence in more or less a direct hit from this tropical storm, though it may, the center of circulation fall in California, it's possible it could end up making landfall south of Tijuana and then moving northward over land into the mountains and deserts of southeastern California. So that's kind of the easternmost plausible trajectory at this point. The uncertainty has decreased a lot in the last 2 days. Question from Dana: Could all of the east-west highways be affected or closed? What about I-5? It is possible. I-15, I-10, probably big candidates, and of course a bunch of state highways that are smaller than those interstate routes could be at risk. I-5, maybe a little bit less so. They could still be some mudslides or flooding, but probably not extended closures. But they're definitely, I-8, I-10, I-15, those are the ones that I think are going to be potentially have big problems. And of course the smaller roads, local roads, state highways, even more so. It's hard for me to say exactly. It's partly an infrastructure and flood management question. It's also a question of just how extreme are the localized totals. Do we end up closer to the lower end of the range, more like 2 to 4 inches widespread, or do we end up more like 5 to 10 inches widespread? If it's the latter, look out. There's a comment that downtown Los Angeles is now included in the tropical storm watch. I have not been able to look at anything since I've been on the live stream, so that's possible. It wasn't true when I started, but it would not greatly surprise me if that is now true or if it became true shortly. Thoughts on the Salton Sea rapidly filling? I am not a hydraulic expert, but to me, given what it takes to fill the Salton Sea, the Salton Sea, of course, was originally filled because of a mistake, a levee failure along the Colorado River, but could it refill from a very extreme precipitation event? It seems plausible without knowing the specific numbers, volumetric curves and all that. Things could be really interesting in the Imperial Valley and the Salton Sea region. Let me just put it that way. And I say that both euphemistically and academically. Euphemistically, things could be dangerous in terms of short-term flooding. Long-term, in terms of what happens in the Salton Sea, could be a good thing in some ways because when that Salton Sea running out of water has been sort of a toxic disaster for the Imperial Valley in terms of point source pollution and a lot of other things. So adding some fresh water to it in and of itself is wouldn't be such a bad thing, but to get there we may have to have a pretty severe flood event, and that could cause real harm in the meantime. Joshua asks, when it comes to the LA Basin, it looks like impacts would be less than compared to remnants of Tropical Storm Dolores back in 2015. Is that accurate? I'm not sure that is accurate. In general, I think that the impacts will probably be equal to or greater than Dolores in most spots, and much more severe in the interior. Again, this region I keep harping on, the eastern slopes of San Diego Riverside Mountains, and both the higher and lower deserts, from Calexico up through the Ridgecrest area. Yeah, a comment from Hedgey. Sorry, I'm. It's a bit of a tongue twister, and it's been a long day of talking. A comment that this happened with K last year. The mountains got it all. West of the mountains barely got any precipitation. That's a possibility this time around, but I think it's much less likely because A, this is going to be a much stronger, moister event, and it's going to be moving much closer to LA and San Diego directly. So could there be some rain shadowing initially as you get downslope winds? Yes. But will there be some spiral bands with heavy precipitation after that almost everywhere? Probably yes. So I think that the impacts will be greater and more widespread than any event we've seen in quite a few years. Is there any possibility that Hilary may track further west and hit the Bay Area? Not really. I would essentially rule that out, although some showers, precipitation on the western fringe is not out of the question at this point still, so that could still happen. Comment from Danielle. Alluvial fans are composed of debris flows, clay to boulder-sized sediment and rocks, and sheet flood deposits, sands. So that is what gets mobilized in storms like this. That is absolutely true, and I am concerned that those alluvial fans may become active Sunday and Monday. There is such a thing as the Alluvial Fan Task Force in Southern California because this is a known hydrologic and geologic hazard. We may be seeing what that looks like in some places Sunday or Monday, and so I hope folks are prepared. Yeah, as several folks point out, you hike around the desert, especially in the canyons, you see all those gigantic boulders. Geology says those boulders, they got there somehow, and this kind of event is the somehow in most cases. There are some other processes that can, weathering and things can roll downhill, but millions of years ago, or many thousands of years ago, at least you can get glaciers that deposit big rocks. But the more recent geologic process that's relevant are huge floods in some of these desert canyons that deposit very large objects, very heavy objects. If you've ever seen a flash flood moving huge boulders downhill, I have seen boulders. Sometimes they can even spark as they get rolled around, pushed by water. So there's you can see this almost like localized electrical activity and lightning going on. It's pretty dramatic because there's so much energy and so much friction involved as these things move downhill. Another comment from Danielle is that once you get to rates of 1 to 3 inches per hour, that's when debris flow risk really goes up. Yes, and that's true even if those rates of rainfall aren't necessarily sustained for the full hour. So if you get 20-30 minutes at 1 to 3 inches per hour equivalent rate, then can be more than enough for a debris flow or flash flood. And there is a high likelihood of reaching those thresholds locally. It's difficult to say exactly where, but it could happen anywhere, but it's most likely in those regions that I mentioned earlier during this event. Yes, let's see. All right. I'm continuing to go down in the comments. Let's see here. Yeah. Comment from Ferg. I hope analysts are being hyperbolic, but it doesn't sound like it. Those folks who know me, I really try very hard to keep things real, and you're hearing what I'm saying today, and this is me keeping it real for this event. So interpret that as you will, but I do think, especially again, to re-emphasize one more time, if you're in the eastern slopes of the mountains in Southern California in particular, especially San Diego and Riverside counties, but also the high and low deserts from the Imperial Valley up through Inyo County. This is going to be a major flood event and could potentially be a historic flood event. Continuing to scroll down here, my apologies. Are we still uncertain about landfall location? Yes. You mean, in the scheme of things, it's like a 50 to 100 mile spread, so not very much at all. But in the terms of impacts, that does affect impacts. So it could be anywhere, landfall from essentially like western LA County all the way east to Imperial County, which would mean it wouldn't technically be a California landfall. So that's the cone right now, the cone of uncertainty from the NHC. It's still wild that almost all of it is in California. I will say that. Again, I can't, there's a lot of comments about specific places, the need to evacuate or not. I can't provide that kind of advice on a person-by-person basis, but I'm trying to give folks a sense of where it is extremely important to take official advice seriously and maybe even go beyond it in those regions that I mentioned there. I think in the more populated urban corridor from San Diego to Los Angeles, I think you can generally rely on the public statements, your experience previously during flood events. I am not convinced that's necessarily true for more interior parts. Again, the eastern slopes of the mountains in Southern California and the deserts. A question of like what specifically to expect, in downtown LA. I mean, essentially, the best median estimate is like a tropical storm. Sustained winds 30 to 40 miles an hour, gusts 50 to 60 miles an hour potentially, and periods of heavy rain. It'll be squally weather, the essence of squally weather. You'll get bands of heavy precipitation, you'll get breaks in between them, you'll get intense bursts of wind, and you might get dead calm wind in between them. As I mentioned earlier, in these spiral bands, there could even be an isolated tornadic spin-up or a water spout. So that's a possibility. That's true for most of Southern California. Yeah, lots of folks commenting that my employer should purchase a new computer. Well, feel free to share that with UCLA. Yeah, hopefully I didn't crash Tropical Tidbits with the shout out. But if you do start using his website, please do contribute to his server costs, since it's quite a large endeavor for one person, and I'm glad I don't have to do it. A question from Ann Mulkern, and I know other folks have asked this. I talked about it last time, and I'll touch on it again today. The question is essentially, what, if any, is the influence of climate change on this sort of event? And this is a difficult question to answer in the moment because, to my knowledge, no one has ever done a formal study on tropical cyclone hazard in a warming climate in California. And I don't think we can look to studies from elsewhere. So we know that generally in the world, hurricanes are becoming stronger as a result of warming oceans. So the ceiling on how intense hurricanes can become goes up pretty quickly as ocean temperatures rise, which isn't too surprising if you know that, well, warm oceans are hurricane fuel. The problem is in California, as I mentioned, we're not just lacking warm ocean. We're also lacking two other major things. Wind currents that tend to push storms in our direction on a recurring basis. That is rare. That is the main reason why we're actually experiencing this historic event this weekend. And also the atmosphere is really stable. We live in the subtropics with a lot of downward moving air. So there are no studies. So what I'm doing now is going on a limb, putting on my meteorologist and climate scientist hat, and talking to you directly about what my assumptions are going into this. I would expect that there will be at least a somewhat increased likelihood of experiencing landfalling tropical storms, or perhaps even someday, especially on the far southern coast near San Diego, an actual landfalling hurricane as we see warmer conditions in the 21st century. But I don't think the risk will rise nearly as much as other sorts of hazards. So I think the far more rapid rise will be in very wet and intense winter storms. And extreme heat waves and severe wildfires in California. So I think it's maybe a little bit, I hesitate to call it a novelty because it's sort of like a low probability, high consequence scenario. We are seeing that there could be some very serious flooding in parts of Southern California from this event. So I do think it is worth the question of whether this might happen more often in the future. The one of the three barriers that might weaken meaningfully is the ocean temperature barrier. Now, that is to be really clear, that does not mean the ocean's going to warm enough to support hurricanes forming near California or sustaining their strength to California. But for every degree the ocean's warm, that barrier weakens a little bit, and the isotherm that is supportive of tropical cyclogenesis creeps northward along the west coast of Baja California. So you can imagine that if a very strong hurricane like the one we're currently seeing, a Category 3, 4, 5 storm, hit the hurricane-killing ocean temperatures 500 miles south of California in the past, and only 300 miles south of California in the future, it doesn't mean we're going to get a intensifying major hurricane in California, but it might mean that the storms that do form under unusual atmospheric wind patterns like the one right now weaken less quickly. So if the oceans were a degree or two warmer uniformly in the eastern Pacific, would this storm have some potential as coming onshore as either a stronger tropical storm or a hurricane? Maybe it would. But again, this is sort of me speculating on the basis of what we do understand about how hurricanes work, how climate change is likely to affect the broader environment, in the absence of any formal studies on the topic. I wouldn't be too surprised if some folks finally do take a look at this in the wake of this event and other recent ones. It's to say that we don't know formally, but I think it is, if this were Mythbusters, I think it might get stamped plausible that climate change could increase the likelihood of events like this, but probably not to a very high degree. So I would say that it is plausible that climate change might bring about a modest increase in the likelihood or the frequency of landfalling tropical storms or hurricanes in California, but they will remain a rare event in any foreseeable future because there's no obvious reason why the other two barriers would necessarily weaken in a warming climate. The atmosphere will still remain relatively hostile in terms of subsidence, and the tropical easterlies will still be tropical easterlies even in a much warmer climate. So of the three barriers, one of them might weaken modestly, the other two will probably remain. I would certainly be open to being proven wrong in either direction if there ever is a formal study on this, but that's what I'm going to stick with until we have some more quantitative specifics. So I'm going to continue, since that was a long answer, but I think it's a good question, and I know a lot of people had it, so I really wanted to address it. There's a couple of comments more on the technical side. StreamYard. All right, maybe I'm going to look into StreamYard this evening. I got to find some time before the next live stream tomorrow, so maybe if anybody has specific platform recommendations for how to take the video rendering server side rather than on my local hardware, let me know. Comment from India. Hurricane hunters are staging and flying out of Santa Maria Airport. Well, that's kind of cool. I'm glad that they're there. The aerial reconnaissance will help pinpoint the exact track of the storm and the impact. So if they are flying this evening, it's they probably won't get, well, depending on if they've already flown a mission or not, that would either get ingested into the 0 Zulu model runs, which have just begun and will become available later this evening, or perhaps the 6 and 12 Zulu runs, which will be available in the middle of the night and early next morning. So my guess is that we'll have better in situ Hurricane Hunter aircraft data regarding what's going to happen probably by tomorrow morning. And those, so the new model runs that'll run tomorrow morning, those will incorporate that, I would imagine. Yeah, a question from Alex about snowfall implications and freezing levels. Yeah, they're going to be super high. You never know, especially on the backside of one of these kinds of storms. Maybe you could get some snow down to like 11, 12,000 feet, but that's, I mean, there is some limited topography above that level, and there are anecdotes about tropical remnant events bringing catching some Mount Whitney hikers unaware in a blizzard, for example, that actually killed some of those hikers in the past. So I doubt anybody who's currently hiking on Mount Whitney is listening to this live YouTube session. But if you have plans to do that this weekend, don't do it. In fact, this is not a good weekend to go to any of the national parks or the regional parks, probably in Southern California, for the most part because of the high likelihood of wind damage and flooding, in particular flooding. And if you're up at 12,000 feet, maybe a summer blizzard. But I haven't really looked at this closely because it's kind of on the edge of the impacts. It might affect hikers, but I guess that's a significant consideration if for some reason you are trying to climb Mount Whitney or something. That would be a big problem if you didn't plan for it. Potential flooding in Avalon, Catalina Island. Yes, the Channel Islands and Avalon in particular are going to be susceptible to both wave action, some minor storm surge, and heavy freshwater flooding from rain on the mountain above town. So the Channel Islands actually could be hit pretty hard in this storm scenario, and there could be damage in particular to in the harbors or on the piers. So again, because most folks use the ferry to get to and from, that could be a pretty big problem, even if there's some temporary damage to the piers. Will airports likely close in San Diego or LA? I don't know. There will definitely be weather delays. I don't know if it's likely that they will close entirely, but I wouldn't completely rule it out because, frankly, we've never had a level of modern air traffic when we've had an event like this. LAX is an extremely busy airport. San Diego less so, but it's also closer to where the storm is likely to make landfall. So if you have flight plans, I would keep an eye on them. And if you're flexible, I would just wait. I would delay it. I would either go prior to noon on Saturday or after Tuesday. Okay, comment that auto captioning is definitely not available. Okay, I'll have to look into that then, since it has been on for previous sessions. Apologies if anybody needed that on this one. Anticipated impacts to Port of Los Angeles marine traffic. Yeah, there should be some. There'll be a minor storm surge. There'll be tropical storm force winds and swells coming from an unusual direction. So, that won't be a huge deal for giant container ships, but it will be a big deal for the cranes and for smaller watercraft for sure. Yeah, question. Yeah, there's several thousand people out in the Black Rock Desert right now for Burning Man. The track ends near there. Fortunately, I don't think there's nearly as extreme of flood risk that far north in Nevada as there is in southern Nevada, where this could be a historic flood event. Nonetheless, there is some flood risk. It's not totally clear how much rain there might be up that far north. So I'll worry about that a little bit later, since it would be a couple days later. Where the impacts would be up there, and I don't think they'll be as extreme, although it could be rainy and windy, so a different Burning Man experience than many years, I suppose. Okay, sorry, I jumped ahead again. I'm running a bit long, so I'm going to try and just skim through and answer the most urgent questions, since I will be doing more sessions this weekend. Any sense of tornado risks as the band passed through? There is a risk of isolated tornadic or waterspout spin-ups. They probably won't be strong or widespread, but yes, it's something that could happen. A bigger risk is probably of damaging wind gusts in localized severe thunderstorms as they spiral around the tropical storm. Yeah, Major League Baseball just announced they're moving the Sunday's Padres, Dodgers, and Angels games to a doubleheader on Saturday. That's not surprising and probably a good idea. Yes, it's continuing to go down. I haven't frozen, I promise. I'm just trying to read as many of the comments as I can. Apparently Joshua Tree National Park is closing some areas. That is, I think, wise. I would not choose to visit. I would recommend the people who have plans to go don't go, and people who are there leave by tomorrow afternoon. Same thing is true of Death Valley, by the way. Okay, Death Valley National Park is closing visitor centers and campgrounds through August 22nd. Also a good move. If they haven't completely closed the park, though, just don't go. You might get trapped, and you might not be able to get out. All right. So again, the timing-wise, I think I'll end on this note, and I'll quickly summarize, and then I'm going to call it a day for this before I jump on to working on a blog post, before I jump into interviews, before I jump into working on trying to get Streamlive set up so I can do another live stream tomorrow without so many interruptions. I will say that at least this configuration is not as bad as last time. So worst comes to worst, I'm going to leave OBS as it is right now, and I can return to this if Streamlabs does not work well. So that's my current plan. All right, so to quickly summarize, Hurricane Hilary is a borderline Category 4, Category 5 storm, a very strong hurricane spinning off the southwest tip of Baja California. It is about to, overnight, early morning hours, start to accelerate northward toward California and begin weakening rapidly as both ocean and atmospheric conditions become increasingly unfavorable for it to maintain hurricane strength. It will probably make a direct hit on Southern California, somewhere between the Imperial Valley and Los Angeles County. So it is possible that this could become the first landfalling tropical storm in California since 1939. Tropical storm watches are now in effect for most of Southern California for the first time in modern National Weather Service history, since they've been issuing those products since the 1950s. This is the first time that they've been issued for anywhere along the west coast of the continental United States, and therefore also in California. Flood watches are in effect just about everywhere in Southern California, Southern Nevada, Western Arizona. The greatest risk from this storm is the risk of widespread, potentially severe, and even historic flash flooding, particularly on the eastern slopes of the mountains in Southern California, and especially San Diego, Riverside counties, and both the higher and lower desert regions, all the way from the Imperial Valley up through Inyo County. That includes, perhaps especially, Death Valley National Park, as well as Joshua Tree. Don't go there this weekend and leave if you're already there. In addition, there will be the potential for tropical storm force winds all up and down the coast between potentially all the way from San Diego to as far north and west as about Santa Barbara, most likely from Orange County southward, but potentially extending into LA County. Much stronger winds locally could be experienced in the mountains in particular, where the winds could gust well above 70 miles an hour, perhaps locally even above 100 miles an hour at the highest elevations. And there will be the likelihood of widespread heavy rain. Very heavy rain will likely be confined to the eastern slopes and deserts, but an unusual summer rainstorm is likely just about everywhere, including LA and San Diego. There is a chance of isolated severe thunderstorms and even a few tornadoes in the spiral bands spinning around the tropical storm near the point of landfall. So that could occur really anywhere, especially in coastal Southern California, or maybe also on the spiral bands as they come off the Gulf of California on the other side of the mountains, so in the Imperial Valley, somewhere like that. This will be probably a very high impact storm event, very uncharacteristic for August, and record-breaking precipitation is likely in some parts of the deserts of southeastern California and southern Nevada that could lead to potentially historic and destructive, certainly life-threatening flooding. So take this one seriously, especially if you're in one of those areas. I'll be having additional live streams throughout the weekend. You'll probably see me on TV, and also I'll be writing a blog post if I can get my brain to hold together for long enough this evening. All right, well, thank you, everybody, and stay safe out there, and I'm assuming I'll see a lot of you again probably tomorrow, Sunday, Monday, during future live streams. So thanks again, and see you soon.